Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k. If you think the way the system teaches you to think, and if you value what the system teaches you to value,
it's compliance.
Compliance. Then you end up. Then you're the 99%. They need to make us think that if we work hard and save money, that's the way out. But it's not the way out. For the 99%, the biggest investment that they have is their home, their house poor. After that, it's their 401k. 401ks are not for the 99%. They're for the financial. They're for the Wall Street. That benefits Wall Street. They take that money. Don't get me started. A mortgage on a house to buy a house is not for the home buyer. Mortgages are for the banks. It's a banking product. They borrow money at under 1%. They lend it to us at 3 or 4%. You have to forget everything that you were taught.
Right. Out of the 99%.
In the 99% box. You just have to start over.
Do you think that's because of your family? You think you growing up around entrepreneurs, you were resistant to the machine?
I was always a little bit of a rebel and resistant. I don't know if it's because of my family or not. My older brother used to say to me, why do you want to do that? You limit your options. Why do you want to do that? You box yourself in. Why do you want to do that? You don't have control. So I was hearing those kinds of things from a young age. And I didn't really understand consciously what any of that meant. But I think as I got older, I started to think like, oh, that's what he meant. I always found life to be about options. The more options you have, the more likely you are to have success or to change course or to make decisions that are good for you. Where are the schools and the teachers that inspire true independent thought and creative thought and result-oriented thought? And I know they're out there. We need good teachers. They're so underpaid. And when you get a great teacher, you remember them, you hold on to them forever, right? Because you don't want to.
I asked you a few weeks ago, like teachers that stood out, and everyone has that. Everyone has an answer to that question.
Think about the dilemma our founding fathers were in. All right, guys, we got to create a system here. We got a burgeoning population. We're young now, but in a few hundred years, there's going to be 300 million people. There's going to be 50 states, very well populated. How are we going to do this? All right, well, we got to teach everybody to be, compliant penguins and sheep, and we can give them a little but not too much, and take care of them a little bit but not too much, and those who can break free, those will be the society and business leaders, and they'll invent things and own land. And I think that's how the conversation went. I wish someone could solve all this. You can't. We're so intertwined with everything. You can't just change 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 things and have meaningful change in society. You have to change everything. You can do a lot of that stuff, but none of it really creates anything more than incremental change. In the best of times, Barack Obama said that. Even in the best of times, the best you can hope for is incremental change.
Like my mantra in 2020 has been from this person, Jen Bailey, has this quote that relationship moves at the speed of trust, but society moves at the speed of relationship. And
man, that's good.
Yeah, to me that feels like it's not a scalable answer. It's not an answer that fixes this problem, but it's the only thing that seems really actionable to me. And that's what I've been holding on to for the year.
It's inherent in what our society is. You have to live somewhere. You have to be part of some society. The rules of our society are all these crazy things that we're talking about, but there's so many good things too. So there is good with the not good, and there is fruit with the stress, and there is positive to the negative. I think we have it pretty good here. We need to do a lot to improve. And I would change 100 things immediately tomorrow. But I'd rather live here than in, I don't know, the sperm that created me ended up being New Jersey sperm. So I live here, thankfully.
Well, it's one of those things, you can always, if you want to be a pessimist, there's plenty of information to back that up. If you want to be an optimist, you can find the information for that as well. So,
yeah, right.
So might as well choose the thing that puts you in the best state of mind.
Hey, George, have we been rolling? Because you never even told me.
We've been rolling.
Yeah. All right.
Welcome to the Daily Cash Flow, guys. My name's George Rops.
I'm Peter. Thanks, George.
Yeah, I just figured we'd get into it, a little conversation.
So I remember last week we spoke about how we had Dow 30,000.
Yeah.
We had an all-time Bitcoin high this week.
Right, I saw that. Yeah, it's wild. It's funny. I think I mentioned to you before we started rolling. I've followed Bitcoin for years now, and I have a lot of friends that are really interested in it. They're a friend at Google that's really all into that stuff. I cannot speak about that with much competency. But what are your thoughts on
Well, it's still new for our world and our society, even though it's 10 years old now. It's still really new. Yeah. It's a store of value, so it's like gold. It's finite, like gold. I don't love investing in much other than income-producing real estate. Bitcoin's interesting. If you invest in Bitcoin, you have to just play it like you think you've already lost all the money and you won't get it back, and you got to wake up in 10 or 20 years and see what it did. But, people say that Bitcoin could be the new store of value like gold has been throughout history. And gold currently is worth, I think, 11 or 12 trillion dollars based on today's market price. And Bitcoin is far, far less than that. People think that Bitcoin can go up to where gold is. Based on that, Bitcoin can hit $1 million per.
Yeah.
And if it does that, and if it's at 18, 19, 20,000 per now, and it goes to $1 million per, you're talking about 50x. Time will tell. I think it's got to be like investing in a vintage car or a piece of artwork, right? It doesn't throw off income. It's not a business with employees. It's not an income producing asset. It's just a store of value. It's tricky. There's large fluctuations. Who knows where it's going?
And a lot of confusion on how it works, how to really make money.
Yeah, well, I'm not interested in making money with it. I think it's a necessary and evolutionary, sensible part of our world now.
In terms of the decentralization?
Everything that it does, that it stands for, all of the things that's happening in our world today, lend itself and direct itself towards something like Bitcoin. Even the conversation that we were having for 5 or 10 minutes just before, George, talking about our society and our world, banks are a part of that, money systems are a part of that, the Fed is... People know so little about the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
We could do 5 episodes just on the Federal Reserve.
Absolutely.
Its impact on our world, its relationship to government. People think it's part of our government. It's not.
Yeah.
It's a brand name that they put on this entity that's not controlled by the federal government. We as taxpayers, we don't vote for anything relating to the Federal Reserve. We vote for our president, our congressmen, our senators. We have nothing to do with the Federal Reserve. And it's the single most impactful part of our world, more than Republicans and Democrats and presidents and senators and congresspersons.
No, considering how much effect the Fed and the IMF have on the global economy, that there's really not much understanding about that.
For all of those reasons, I think that Bitcoin is going to become more attractive. I mean, sure, they have to figure out how to prevent criminals and gangs and terrorists from taking advantage of the benefits of these digital cryptocurrencies, but I think they'll get there, and they'll figure that out at some point.
You had mentioned that despite interest in Bitcoin and what it might mean for the future, you're really only interested in income-producing real estate.
I don't own Bitcoin. I don't invest in it. I don't trade it. So I speak to you only from an interested consumer's perspective. I read up on it. I speak to people that know a lot more than me about it. I'll keep you posted if that changes.
Yeah. So I was just going to ask. We've talked about leverage a little bit in terms of the benefits of multifamily real estate.
Yep.
Could you go into a little bit about how leverage works, and are there kind of mistaken notions about that?
Well, it's for real estate, leverage is a classic concept. People have heard about it before. Basically, you borrow money, you get a mortgage from a bank. And if you're buying real estate and you get a mortgage, it just means you have to come out of pocket less with your own equity, because you're getting some money from the bank. So you're buying $1 million property, you get a $600,000 mortgage, you have to come up with $400,000. If you buy $1 million property, you put in $400,000, the bank puts in $600,000. Now you have to service the debt every month and make the bank payments. Let's say that you can do that. The property over time appreciates to $2 million. You're going to go sell that building for $2 million. You have to pay back the bank $600,000. You're left now with 1.4. So the property has doubled in value, 1 million to 2 million. But because of the effects of leverage, your $400,000 is now worth $1,400,000. So the property has increased 2x. The value of your $400,000 investment, your equity that you originally had to put up to buy the building, has gone up 4x. So leverage is the disproportionate relationship that can be achieved between the value of your asset and the value of your investment or equity.
And I would imagine in this scenario, more is not always better because...
More is not better. There's a right and wrong way to determine how much leverage to apply. So you've heard me talk a lot before about things like debt to income ratios and debt to asset ratios and loan to value ratios. And these things are all calculable and manageable metrics. And so, you don't want to put 100% leverage on an asset because now you have no skin in the game and you have a huge amount of debt service relative to the income, if any, that it's throwing off. So the more debt you have, the more sensitive your asset's going to be to interest rate fluctuations and income fluctuations. So if you have a hiccup in business or if interest rates change at reset in your loan, it's going to suck more cash out of your monthly income. You're going to have less to service the debt. You could lose your asset. You can do your own underwriting and you can do your own math to know even before you call a bank to ask them to give you a loan if you're over leveraging or under leveraging. And the metric that's going to tell you if you're going over or under is the debt service coverage ratio. So in our business of income producing real estate, the banks aren't giving us money if the debt service coverage ratio is under 1.25. So some banks require 1.3, some banks require 1.25. That's your range. And you're going to say, well, Peter, 1.25 of what? The answer is of net operating income if you're in real estate or of EBITDA if you're in business. And you're going to find a good balance between the amount of money that you can borrow to maximize your return on equity and also be able to make the mortgage payments every month.
When you write an offer for a real estate deal, what's your process look like? What do people need to know about
that's
that
a secret of the trade, man.
Right.
It depends on a few things. So it depends on who my seller is. It depends on the asset class that I'm trying to go after. I have to gear my offer to my audience. So an offer is really just a way to communicate something, just like any presentation or writing an email or a letter or anything. I want to sound a certain way to achieve a certain result. I buy a lot of value add real estate in my market, George. So often my sellers of value add real estate are longtime owners, self-managed owners. If I am trying to make an offer for a property that's brought to me by a broker, the broker might lead me and say, hey, Peter, don't write up an offer. Just will you hit $10 million for this? Tell me yes. We'll let the lawyers work out the terms. These guys are going to get too scared if you send them a big 4-page thing with terms. And I'll let the broker dictate that to me. If I'm going after it myself and there's no broker, I'm going to have to make that determination myself and feel out my seller. If it's a Class A building being sold to me by a sophisticated builder or developer, perhaps a pension fund or an insurance fund or something like that, it's a sophisticated audience. I can put a full suite of terms in writing. They're going to want to see that. They're going to want to make sure it's not just Joey Bag of Donuts sending over something verbally or in an email. They're going to want to see a sophisticated. They're going to see it on letterhead. They're going to want to see the broker's going to take it over or have my lawyer send it over. I mean, it's going to have to be delivered properly and appropriately for that type of audience. So I really gear it depending on who the audience is. You have to know that stuff. But typically it's purchase price, amount of deposit. The big things lately are terms. So is there a due diligence period? Is there a mortgage financing contingency period? Yes or no? How long? What's the amount of time for those two periods? What are the obligations of the buyer? What are the obligations of the seller? If you over-obligate the two parties, it's tough. People don't like to see in writing all of the things that you're making them do. A seller just wants to know that you're paying them and what's the date of closing. That's really all a seller wants. So the more you ask a seller for in terms of contingencies and time, and I need a 120-day due diligence period, they're just going to go tell you to pound sand. That's one of the things that I'm able to achieve in my market here is I'm sort of the category killer down here. So I can look at any occupied multifamily building and I can tell my seller or my broker, look, I'm going to give this purchase price. I don't need a due diligence period. I don't need a mortgage fine. I mean, I know what the bank's going to give me. I know what the appraiser is going to appraise it at. I've been doing it so long and I've done so many transactions. I just know where it's going to shake out. I don't need to have a mortgage appraisal contingency. I know where it's going to appraise, man. One question I ask every single time a broker brings me a deal is, who's my seller? What's the profile of the seller? Maybe they can't divulge who the seller is by name, which I respect, so I'll spin it and I'll say, what's the profile of the seller? Is it a fund? Is it a family? Is it a 92-year-old guy who just needs out? Is it, like, what's the deal? What am I up against here? Your seller needs to have confidence in you. The biggest thing that I instill in my sellers when I make an offer is confidence and certainty of closing. I've never not closed on a deal that I've gone after. Never.
You mentioned that value add properties are kind of your main jam. What are maybe 3 to 5 of your favorite value adds for property?
I love this question. So that also depends. For my Class A properties, I don't do much. Maybe I'm looking for opportunities to improve the site if I've got extra ground space or extra acreage on my Class A site. But here's what I love. My value add projects that are Class C minus, Class C, Class C plus, and I'm trying to force some appreciation and get them into the high B level. Unit conversions, so maybe you've got a large 1-bedroom unit that you can go from 1 beds to 2 beds by maybe putting up a wall, creating more light and air in the newly created bedroom. I love creating glass enclosed showers in bathrooms with fresh modern tiling and getting rid of the old bathtubs. In our market, there aren't a lot of renters with young babies or toddlers that need to be in a bathtub. So we find that a bathtub is an outdated feature in a bathroom for us, so we remove the bathtubs and put in glass enclosed showers. Try it. I think you can get a lot more money for a sexy bathroom with a glass enclosed shower. Here's another one. Security features where there weren't any before. So I'm talking about exterior and perimeter digital security cameras going to an NVR that pipe into the property management office. I'm talking about virtual doormen, digital lock systems, all that stuff. It's good. You can get value out of those improvements. George, here's a huge one. Art, public art. Art outside of the building, art inside the building, in the hallways and common areas and spaces. You could do murals, you could do paintings, you could do sculpture and signage installations outside that are unique to your property and your address. You could do a mural if it's a masonry building and there's space on a brick wall. You could engage with local artists to come to your site and have them interpret for you some great piece of art that wasn't there yesterday. Because these buildings are old buildings. They don't look so great now in 2021. They were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're a little dated. So you're going to want to bring your buildings up to date. Public art and interior art is a great way to do that.
We've gotten a lot of good response about our conversation surrounding lease documents and different things like that. Are there 3 to 5, lease tricks or things that you need to put in your lease?
I love this segment. We did it once before. I love doing it, and I love sharing this information. So George, it differs from state to state. So you have to know what your state regulations are when coming up with lease terms. But in my markets, in my states, here they are. I love these. So number 1, joint and several. If you have more than one occupant, more than one resident, or if you have a co-signer and a tenant that are signing on a lease, you have to have language in there that says that each person is joint and several. What does that mean? George, if we're roommates and we sign a lease together and I fly down to Mexico and say sayonara, I'm not off the hook and you're on the hook for me. You can't tell the landlord, well, Siegel left, here's my 50% of the rent. The landlord's going to say, sorry, George, you're joint and several. You owe 100% of the rent. Joint and several. If you're a landlord, property owner, you have to have that in your lease. Number 2, you have to have a legal fee provision. I'm pretty sure every state requires there to be specific language in your lease document that says what the landlord is entitled to, should the landlord have to commence a legal case to enforce its rights, either to collect money in a non-payment situation or perhaps to get their property back or evict someone where there's something bigger than a non-payment situation happening. But if you have to pay a lawyer to enforce your rights as a property owner, your lease better have a legal fee provision in there that says that you can charge the tenant those legal fees plus court costs and filing costs for your efforts and time and money to then have to go after and enforce your rights. So George, this is a big one and it's a secret and no one does it. Your lease needs to require that your tenant maintains certain humidity and temperature levels inside their apartment. So why? Summertime, right? July, June, late June, August. We know what it's like up here, the Northeast of the United States. It's hot, it's muggy, it's humid. George, at your house, would you ever just turn the heat off or turn the AC off and just leave it off for an extended period of time? Well, you know what happens when you do. There's no circulation. When there's no circulation, moisture builds. When moisture builds, things like mold and allergens can take hold inside the interior of the place. There needs to be a requirement for the tenant to maintain certain humidity and moisture levels so that you, as the property owner, as the landlord, can't be held responsible for things like mold that builds up or moisture damage that should occur if the tenant goes away in the summertime and turns off their AC unit, or if the tenant goes away in the wintertime and doesn't leave the heat on and something happens, God forbid, in these older buildings, something freezes, the tenant says, hey, I went to go visit my mom for a month and I come back and my apartment's filled with ice. Well, yeah, because the pipes froze and burst because you didn't leave the heat on. So you got to have that in your lease. Here's another secret. You got to have, George, do you own any income producing real estate?
I don't yet.
You don't. Well, when you do, you're going to include this in your lease document. You're going to require that the tenant use all the building systems in a typical and reasonable manner, and that they're going to be held liable for any damage to the systems. So what does that mean? I'm going to give you an example. 2020, COVID. Everyone's staying at home. People are now working from home. People that work from home now have to plug shit into the walls. Computers, screens, Alexas, appliances. We had a hair salon person not be able to go to their salon to do work. So what does this person do? They take like a portable basin and they attach it to the kitchen sink. They plug in 500 hair dryers and all sorts of stuff into the walls. They're overloading the electrical system. They're overloading the plumbing system. And on Tuesday morning, we get a phone call at the office. Hey, it's the tenant in apartment 302. My electricity's blown and I have no water coming out. And you guys suck as landlords. Send your repair people over right now and deal with this atrocity for me. Oh, really? You plugged in 5 billion watts of electrical appliances into your standard one-bedroom apartment and you have a hair salon apparatus connected to your kitchen sink, and somehow we have to now go and spend hundreds or thousands of dollars repairing all of that stuff?
That wasn't one of your value adds, Peter?
That should be a shut the fuck up. So, yeah, as a landlord, as a property owner, you have to have language in your lease that restricts use of the apartment to standard, typical, reasonable residential comings and goings. If someone's going to plug in industrial or commercial or professional appliances or tools into your standard wall outlets, there's going to be a problem, and as the property owner, you shouldn't have to pay for that, so make sure you have that in your lease. The next thing you have to have in your lease, I don't care who you are, you have to have this in your lease. No alterations, no modifications, no repairs, no painting allowed by the tenant. Even painting, here's why. If you permit tenants to paint, who's responsible for repainting when they move out? You are as the property owner. What does that cost? Well, for me to do a room, it's like $500 a room between labor and materials. I got to put primer on, 2 coats. Why should the property owner have to pay for repainting if someone wants to put in winter forest black on their ceiling? They need written consent. So no alterations, modifications, repairs, or painting without written consent from the landlord. And landlords don't give the written consent. The other thing that happens is people will say, oh, I thought I could paint. And they'll put a ladder in there. The ladder's now scratching your wood floors. And they'll get up on the ladder and they'll drip paint while they're painting the ceiling or the walls in some crazy thing. They're going to drip paint everywhere. And now you've got paint on your wood floors. It's a mess. Don't allow anybody to do any work. If you have to do work, you do the work. So I don't care what state you're in. If you own multifamily property, your lease documents better require your tenants to report damages, maintenance, and repairs requests to your office immediately. They can't sit on it. The longer they sit on it, the more it festers and grows, and little problems become big problems. So what will happen is, when it comes time for that tenant to vacate and move out, you go do your move-out inspection, you go find 20 things wrong with the apartment, and it comes out of their security deposit. They're going to say to you, oh yeah, well that broke, you guys should have fixed it. Did you tell us about it? Did you ask us to? Go check the maintenance logs. Go check the online portal. I don't see a repairs request from you. you're responsible. So it's going to come back to bite you at some point. You must require the tenant to put you on notice of anything that breaks at any time.
Zest Quests, Peter?
What is that, George?
Zest Quests? I mumbled over my words, but Zest Quests.
Are you asking me or telling me?
Are you ready for Zest Quests?
George. Fucking yes, of course.
Yeah, sorry. I should just assume that you're always prepared. What was your preferred style of play as a child? How did you like to play?
Rough.
Rough, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And did that mean sports? Did that mean pretend? Did that mean everything? Everything was rough?
No, I didn't pretend rough. I'm the youngest of 4 boys. My brothers found a reason to beat the crap out of me every day in a loving way. And I play rough. I play sports. I get gritty, and I'm a scrappy guy to have on your team if we're playing sports together. And if we're on opposing teams, I'm scrappy, so look out. But I played rough.
Hell yeah. So speaking of gritty, last Zest Quest is more of just a prompt. You mentioned that you went out into the Midwest for a while and worked on a dude ranch.
I did.
Can you talk about that a little bit? I feel like I have to know, like what led to that decision? What interested you about that, and what did you learn from that?
I was always adventurous. I needed to find something to do after college. I didn't want to get a desk job or a real job or whatever the phrase is.
How soon after graduation was this?
This was 5 months after graduation.
Okay.
I had to get a job.
So right after.
And my mom said, "Oh, why don't you go travel, or why don't you go do this, or why don't you go work on a cowboy ranch?" And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And she almost pushed me into it. She did push me into it. She encouraged it. I said, "Man, that sounds like fun." She really enabled me to give myself permission to do that. And I went out. I worked at the Crescent H Ranch in Wilson, Wyoming. And it was an unbelievable property. When I was there in 1990, I mean, it's hundreds and hundreds of acres in the Teton Mountains, and you're in Jackson, Wyoming. It was called Wilson, Wyoming, right outside of the town of Jackson. And man, we had guest cabins, we had cattle, we had horses.
How did you find this place?
Just did some research, and you find it. You're like, whatever I used back then. What you call the Chamber of Commerce in.
Yeah, because I was going to say,
we didn't have Google, so I recall calling the Chamber of Commerce in these towns that I'd heard of, in Cody and Jackson Hole and Colorado and Montana and these places. And I said, I need a ranch. I want to go work on a ranch. Who can I call? And they eventually point you in the right direction. I went to this ranch. They said, yeah, we're hiring. We need support staff. Some days you'll be a waiter. Some days you'll be shoveling shit. Some days you'll be fixing stuff, like whatever, but we need you. Can you come? I'm like, hell yeah. I remember I put my surfboard on top of my Chevy Blazer SUV and I drove out west to Wilson, Wyoming. My dad said to me, what the fuck are you putting you're going to Wyoming. What are you doing with a surfboard? I'm like, Dad, come on, they got waves. So I'm gonna drive. There's going to be a swell that hits Santa Cruz. I'm going to want to go up over the mountains, and I'm going to want to surf Northern California. You watch.
Did you do that?
I did it like 10 times. So that's why I put my surfboard on the car going to Wyoming. But it was great, and you learn a lot about yourself. Completely new environment, and I remember one specific incident that happened. I was shoveling shit one day, a lot of cow shit and horse shit. And we had lost one of our horses, and it'd been several days. We didn't know where it went. We knew it wandered off the property. Turns out that one of the neighboring ranches kept it, and they weren't returning it. Like, we don't know if the neighbor stole a horse or if the horse wandered off, but either way, the horse was part of the neighbor's cattle, and we had to get the horse back. And we called up the guy. He wasn't complying. He was like, fuck you, I'm not giving it back. It's my horse now. Oh, really, is it? So that's all you have to do is tell a bunch of cowboys and a wannabe cowboy, I was just doing my job at that point, that we can't have our horse back. And there was like 20 of us. We got on horses. Some guys had bats. Some guys had guns. I was scared shitless, right? I'm like, what's happening here? We're gonna go get our horse back. So we run over in like a scene out of Billy the Kid. And we get our horse, and we get around the horse, and we sort of corral him off and nudge him off the neighbor's property. The neighbor came out and was going to try and yell at us, but there was too many of us, and we got our horse back, and it was awesome. It was terrifying, but awesome. And I have a picture of that, so I'm going to give it to you. Maybe you'll put it up.
Yeah,
but
we can do that for throwback. Yeah.
I have a picture of that day of me on my horse going over to support I was really support. I didn't play a critical role in that. I was just there to be a head count. Yeah, I didn't have a bat or a gun, but it was definitely a lot of fun.
You were there to bring the tail back for all of us on the East Coast.
I met so many people. I met Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Really?
Who came to the ranch. He was a guest at the ranch, and he stayed there because he was thinking about buying property in the area, so he came by to see our property. I met Harrison Ford, who actually lives or maintains a home in that area, so I met him. Met a bunch of professional athletes, skiers and football players. It was so cool.
High-profile ranch?
Super low profile, but it's such an incredible part of the country and part of the world, and what's happening topographically and geographically and with nature and mountains and rivers and streams. People come and it's an extraordinary thing. You're really in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
Idaho is 10 miles to the north, and you got Montana a few hundred miles over to the east, and there's these incredible natural structures, and people come to see them, and they come through Jackson. When they come through Jackson, they came to see us.
Yeah, wow. That's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for the question.
And I'll see you next week. Yeah.
See you next week. Don't forget to put that stuff in your leases, everybody.
If you like what you just heard, you can subscribe to The Daily Cash Flow on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'd love it if you left us a review. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook @SiegelCap and on Instagram @Siegel.cap. As always, if you're an accredited investor, go to SiegelCapital.com and take our survey to see if you qualify to take part in one of our apartment building deals. That's SIEGEL Capital.com.